as they were just making the things and being who they were,
Right.
out of who they were became a piece of art or an invention or a thought, right?
Yeah.
Or an idea or a concept out of just who they were and how they lived and engaged with the things around them and the people around them. You're listening to the Experience Freedom Podcast. I'm your host, Ajene Gaylord, and I endeavor to educate, encourage, and empower women to embrace emotional healing and eradicate the stigma of mental health in the body of Christ. On this episode, we begin our two-part series on the lie of productivity. Michelle and I have a wonderful conversation about the ways that we often find ourselves paying more attention to what we do than who we are. So what I wrote down had to do with the lie of productivity, which is how do we get to the point that what we do is more important than who we are. How do we learn to rest? And I came up with the acronym for REST. Of course I did.
Surprise, surprise.
Which is not the rest in lay down and take a nap rest, but more in placing upon rest. Like if you were to rest your pen on the table.
Oh, yes.
There's a sense of, the table is going to support the pen. I know it can be placed here for security.
That's good.
That's the rest I want to talk about. And so the acronym is to rely entirely on the spirit of truth. That's what it means to rest. To rely entirely on the spirit of truth. And then what are some of the lies that we believe that lead to shame and prevent us from resting?
So the lie of productivity was interesting because I was listening to an interview and they were talking about productivity. I can see the positive aspect, like as a society, not wanting people that are just mooching and being lazy and things like that. So it's like, well, you need to be a productive citizen, right? And obviously, you're not trying to say that that's not true. You don't want a bunch of people who are just taking advantage of the work of other people. But the other side is that everybody is all about productivity and they're not looking at people as human beings. They're just looking at them. What can you do for society? What can you contribute and all of that? I'm reading a book with my son and talking about Michael Jordan, Abraham Lincoln, Emily Dickinson, Thomas Edison, these people that failed, right? And then, Michael Jordan, it was always like I read one of his biographies or something when I was maybe in high school because I was a big basketball fan. And, you miss 100% of shots you don't take, but he, was given the final shot this many times and he missed it this many times and things like that. But of course he kept going. He never gave up. And this may be totally off topic, but it made me think of why do we idolize certain people in history, right? That it's like we look to, we need a Michael Jordan to tell us that you have to keep going. Or even when you're trying to teach your children, picture book biographies, it's like, okay, these are great stories. And nowadays, they're definitely working on getting more people's stories out there, more regular people or not the same old, handful of famous people, right? Trying to find kind of a little more of obscure stories of people that have made a difference and such. But then it goes again to that power of story. And like every person has a story, whether a book is ever made about them that will live on after them. They have something to contribute just by the fact that they're on the planet Earth at this time in history. And so I think just to look at people as, your story is important, whether it's written down or idolized by others or not, just the preciousness of one person. So, and I have a reason for that while it's like fresh on my heart too, because I just watched an adoption story. Which, yeah. But anyways.
Yeah. As you were talking, I was thinking about a couple of questions to add. Like you said, why do we idolize certain people in history? And then my question, in addition to that, is what is our obsession with celebrities and heroes? Like, what is it that makes us think, like you said, or normal or ordinary stories are not as valuable as the hero story or the underdog story or the person who's accomplished something? And I kind of feel like there's a disconnect between being able to accomplish something and acknowledging that accomplishment, but then also being ordinary in a sense, being normal or atypical. I don't like to use the word normal. I'd rather use atypical because I think there's a lot of connotation that we attach to normal, and I don't like that connotation. And so I'd rather use atypical as a word. But I think about the greatest hero in our entire history, who wasn't a celebrity, who was well known, and I guess you would consider that being famous, but his story was tragic. Jesus on the cross was a tragedy. It was not a glorious, glamorous experience whatsoever. His entire journey from being born in a manger and hunted to be killed, his family having to escape to Egypt because there was an edict like kill all little boys because that Christ is born and we got to get rid of him, to growing up into a man and collecting some dudes who will follow him and be with him, who eventually one of his main dudes turned on him and was like, I don't know who you're talking about, when he was challenged. Peter was challenged. And he was like, I don't know who that Christ is, to being beaten and ostracized and even exchanging himself for a murderer. They wanted Barabbas. They didn't want Christ to come off of the cross. They wanted him to be crucified. He went from being honored as Hosanna one week to the next week they're like, give us his blood, put his blood on us and all that kind of thing. And I think about if we were to tell that story today in the context of our modern understanding, and we didn't connect him to being the Son of God or God himself, and we just looked at what he experienced, we would not look at that with any hope or excitement, or look at that as a hero story or as someone who accomplished great things, and compare him to a Michael Jordan who was able to do well in his career, or Jeff Bezos who did well in business, or any of these people. Like, we would not equate that story to something that seemed like we want to celebrate it. We would look at that story like, that is horrible. Look at all the bad things that happened to him. But his sacrifice and the fact that he did what he did is the greatest story ever told. And it's the greatest sacrifice ever given, for God himself to wrap himself in flesh, go through the womb to be born, to live as a helpless infant, grow into a child, grow into a teenager, go through adolescence to become a young man, to then go into ministry and give of himself and give of himself and give of himself, to eventually give of his own life, to where he was able to be the sacrifice for the entire world. And that if anyone chooses to believe that, they are now saved and can inherit everything that he has. Like, that is a wonderful story, but looking at it from the lens of humanity, when we see the facts around what happened to him, we don't celebrate that. We don't see that as something that we should honor, or something that we should lift up, or something that we should model or even emulate. As a matter of fact, the world tells us the opposite message of get yours, get all the things, elevate to the highest level, not be humble enough to die, be humble enough to obey the Father, be humble enough to give of your life. The world is saying, take everything you can take, get all that you can get, be all that you can be, do all the things, get all the money. And Christ told someone in the scriptures, like, take everything you have, a rich man, take everything you have, sell it and follow me. This guy came up to him like, I've kept all the commandments since my youth. I've done all the right things. What should I do to follow you? He said, sell all the stuff you got, give up your wealth and your riches and follow me. And he was like, walked away grieved, because that was a heavy thing to let go of. The world says, get all the things. So I think about how we even equate our lives to this productivity lie. that you're supposed to do a bunch of stuff. Now, if we compare Christ's story to anything else, he didn't do a bunch of stuff. Like, he didn't have possessions. He didn't have a place to lay his head. I don't think he went from tent to tent. If I recall that correctly, like, he had skills as a carpenter or stonemason, however you interpret the skills of that day. He was able to use his hands for work, but he didn't have a palace. As a matter of fact, the Jews of that day were confused that he didn't roll in on a Rolls Royce, like a shiny horse with a crown on his head to overthrow the Roman kingdom. Like, they were looking at him like, you're not a shiny king. You're not the thing that we imagined. You're not this celebrity. Where is all of that? We thought you were going to roll in, rescue us from this oppressive society and take the throne and put everybody at bay. Like, he came on a humble donkey. A mule, some kind of lowly animal he rode in on. Like, he wasn't all that, but somehow society has shifted to where that has become what we ascribe to, what we aspire to accomplish. What we are trying to do is just do all the things so we can get all the things, so we can be famous and be acknowledged and be recognized. And that's wearing people out mentally and emotionally. Like, this lie of productivity. I think if we look at the history of humanity, just in general, going from the Garden of Eden to where there was paradise and it was perfect, and basically Adam and Eve were just like chilling in the garden, enjoying the cool of the day. The Spirit of the Lord would just go through the breeze and they were just having a good old time. They didn't have to labor. But since the fall happened, the consequences of the fall was like, you got to work by the sweat of your brow. You got to produce. You do have to do something. Prior to that, it was just be fruitful and multiply. After the fall, it was like, okay, you are going to have to work the land. The ground is cursed. Mankind wasn't cursed, but the ground became cursed. And so now you have to work it. Now there's going to be thorns that come up with the roses. Now there's going to be weeds that grow up, and you're going to have to deal with those and till those. So that became the first instance of we have to do some work and some labor. But I think over time it shifted to where we had an agricultural society, and we did have some nomads. I'm not going to say that we didn't have people who lived, and especially as migration began to happen over the planet, we had people who lived, out of doors and didn't necessarily tend to fields, but we also had agricultural society, especially in the birthplace of civilization. So we see that you had people who had to work the land just to eat. In order for people to eat, they had to go and reap the harvest and do the work and thresh the wheat on the threshing floor and all this stuff. And over time, mankind has created machines and tools to help make that work a little easier. So we went from having none of those things available to us, but the creativity and ingenuity of mankind bringing in tools and machines and processes that help make that work easier. Well, with that came, fast forward to more of our industrial society, we're building factories and huge industrial buildings with these large machines to make the work easier, to produce more things, to create more products so that life can be easy. I think about this TV show that I was watching, and in the show, it's in the 1920s where it's based. And so this is the frontier, and where you're talking about the cowboys and, people who were basically living on the land, but then they were building these cities. These cities started to pop up. And so this cowboy was going into the town with their people. And of course, they're going to the local markets and the shops. And he walks up to this guy, and this guy's like trying to sell him a washing machine. So this is the one that was basically a tub with a little board. You had to crank it with your hand. But it was, he's like, here's what you used to have to do. Here's the washboard and the bucket, and you had to use your body to kind of press your clothes and all that. He's like, well, here's a machine that you can plug in, and it's going to do all that work for you. So the cowboy looked at him and said, well, if I get this machine from you, I got to buy the machine, right? He said, well, yeah, we can put you on a payment plan where you can take it, but then you have to pay each month towards the purchase of it because it's a very expensive machine. And then he said, well, if I bring the machine home, how am I going to run it? I don't have water. I'd have to go and get a water connection, and I'd have to get electricity connected. And then that means you have to come out, you have to run the wires, you have to connect all that to my house. And now I have to pay for the utilities to run. And so this is supposed to make my life easier. But as a matter of fact, for me to pay for the product, for me to pay for what I'm going to need to run the product, I got to go out and work even more. And so when am I going to have time to be with my family, to like that just thought. And I was just like, this is amazing that they're putting this on television. Yeah. Because it's like, we're going to make your life easier. We're going to make it, you don't have to work so hard, but then actually you do. You actually have to work harder. It's just a different type of work. It's not the physical rigor of having to use the washboard to get your clothes clean. It's that I have to go out and labor for someone else, for them to pay me, for me to pay to have the convenience of all of these things. So that type of mentality has been created in our society, where it's like, here, we want to make it easier. We're going to create something to lighten the load, but that cost is going to be more than just the money you pay. It's going to be the life you have to give up in order to maintain all of this. And yeah, it may be faster to get your laundry washed, but is it going to cost you your health because you're not physically using your body like you once did, to do all of the household chores and to take care of all the things around? You're not using, so you're now having to pay for a gym membership to go work out and find time in your schedule after you spend 8 hours at the office to go work out your body because you're not using your body. Like, it's a whole evolution in a sense of where we've come from as a society and built into this system of why we see what we see as far as our physical health is concerned, as far as our mental and emotional health is concerned, why people are struggling to a degree that we have never seen in history before. And it's just like a perfect storm of all of these things that have put us in a position where we don't even see how damaging it is to live up to this lie of productivity. In order for us, even our school system, you and I have discussed this many times about the creation of the school system, not education, but the school system, in order to produce people who could produce, in order to train people to become employees so that they could feed this machine of industry, to have people that will work these machines, have people that could do the work so that they could keep the producing going, right? And so even if we don't, from a modern society, understand all those facets in our own personal individual lives, I think we bought into this lie that we have to do a ton of things. And if we don't do a ton of things, we're not productive, right? We're not a good citizen. We're not a productive member of society. I know you've heard that phrase. I've heard that phrase. What does that even mean? What does being a productive member of society even mean? And I think we need to flip it on its head and maybe consider, if I tap more into who I am, who I've been created to be, what my talents and skills and natural inclinations and temperament and interests are, and press into that versus what I can make, it will naturally produce something from that. Like if it's, I think about some of the main intellectual figures that we look to, like Einstein, or some of the other inventors like Bell, who they say invented the telephone, other types that we've, philosophers, Socrates, Plato, all of these people that we have attributed all of this intelligence to. How did they go about doing the things that they did? And I think, if I recall correctly, they basically just existed. Took note of what they did and enjoyed. They unschooled. I mean, they basically just did the thing that they enjoyed and wanted to do, took note of it. And then eventually it became a thing. Some of them during their time were ostracized for the things that they did, were actually not accepted in society for the way that they went about creating what they did, or producing what they did, or saying some of the things that they did. It wasn't until later that people appreciated, even some artists. If you think about a lot of the famous artists and going back to their work, they weren't appreciated. It wasn't until later. And so as they were just making the things and being who they were, out of who they were became a piece of art or an invention or a thought, right? Or an idea or a concept, out of just who they were and how they lived and engaged or with the things around them and the people around them. And I think we flipped it to where now it's, what can you do? Can you make enough YouTube videos? Can you do enough of these type of things? Can you work at a job making 6 figures? Can you earn enough degrees? Can you do all of this stuff? That's what we look to first. And then from there we say, oh, okay, well, what is your contribution? Instead of saying, well, let's start with who you are. Let's start with what you naturally have. Let's start with where you, your inclinations are, and then build from there.
Yeah, that's really good.
So I want to ask, how do we overcome the lie of productivity? And how do we begin to build a life that is more focused on who we are versus what we do, but also maintaining a sense of being able to create and produce and develop and ignite without the pressures of meeting somebody else's standard? What a great question to end this part of the 2-part series on. So stay tuned for next week's episode, where we will dig into the answer to those questions and maybe a little bit more. You will also receive the life work for this series, so be sure to listen in. That's it for this episode. If you have been enjoying listening, please consider sharing and subscribing to the podcast. And until next time, remember, you have been set free to live free, so choose freedom.